My wife 37 was a business partner with her father. They were both extremely wealthy because of this. Which made me 34 wealthy too. Since I married into her family, her father and I became very close, and he would show me a lot of business-related activities, so I understood them better. After 6 years of marriage, my wife started to distance herself from me. As part of her responsibilities, she would drive to clients' houses to deliver products to them and discuss upgrades. Obviously, being a well-spoken, friendly, and attractive woman helped business. My wife took this helping business notion a little too far one day. She started to seem particularly distant from me and excited in the weeks when she was scheduled to visit one particular client. I decided to confide in her dad about how I felt and why I noticed. He encouraged me to follow her discreetly to the client's house. I thought this was a sneaky answer from a normally straightforward guy, but I took his advice. I didn't know it was going to become the worst day of my life. I parked down the street from the house in question and watched her go in. The customer's name was Doug. According to our customer information, he wasn't married. Would that stop him from taking advantage of a married woman? Probably not. My mind was already picturing horrible scenarios, and it wasn't far off from what I was going to find. I walked up to the front door after 15 minutes. I thought about knocking, but decided not to, keeping in mind the word sneaky. I opened the front door slowly and peeked inside, but mostly listened. I could hear faint noises coming from the second floor. It didn't sound like any business conversation was taking place. I walked upstairs, my heart was racing, and I started recording on my phone. As I got closer to one particular door, I could hear them going at it. I opened the door and found my wife having sex with Doug. It was my worst nightmare coming true. My wife immediately turned to look at who was barging in on them, and started screaming when she saw it was me. She tried to shield her body from the camera, but it was too late. It saw everything. She screamed for me to stop recording and let her get clothes on. I continued recording as I left Doug's house and got in my car. It recorded my psalms and angry words as I drove to my father-in-law's because I didn't know where else to go. When I got there, my father-in-law acted like a real dad to me. He listened intently as I told him what happened. He watched the video, but only to the point where he could hear moaning. He believed everything I told him, and better yet, he said he was on my side. 20 minutes later, my wife arrived there too. She walked straight into the kitchen, finding us at the dining room table. Before she even sat down, her father asked her how long she'd been seeing Doug. I looked at him in surprise, just like she did because I wasn't expecting him to ask that question. I thought for sure she couldn't have done this more than once. She tried to say it was only this one time, but her dad told her he looked at the travel logs. He knew she was going to Doug's house way more often than necessary the past 11 months. My jaw dropped, and I looked at her expectantly. She didn't know what to say. She tried to speak and protect her image, but it didn't make sense. At one point, it sounded like she was defending her actions by claiming it would help business. Her father offered no sympathy when he told her she was fired. She let out a weird noise of shock and started stammering. She wanted to keep her job, but what could she possibly say? I had her on video sleeping with Doug, and it was clear this wasn't the only time she did it. Besides the betrayal she dealt me, her father told her this was not the behavior he expected from his business partner or daughter. The real whammy that made my wife plead forgiveness was when he announced that he was going to disown her. It didn't matter how much she apologized or what she said. Her father's mind was made up. She couldn't live in her marital home because her father's name was on it, and he didn't want her there. And she couldn't live at his house either. She became homeless living in a nice car, but not a home. Once when she called her dad crying, he told her she had 11 months, the duration of the affair, to stop and reconsider what she was doing. Because she didn't, he finds her despicable. He finished by saying, "I was lucky I found out the truth and got away from her." Her father gave me a choice. I could live in the marital home, and it would become mine, or I could move in with him. He owned a mansion that was about the size of 2 houses put together. The 2 halves were connected by one long hallway. I knew I would have privacy, but most of all, I considered him family and needed his emotional support. I decided I would continue to live in the marital home, but would still visit his place from time to time. He also offered me a partnership for the family business he runs, which I gladly accepted. I've been working with him for 7 years now since all this happened. Since then, I was also able to meet a new amazing woman who is now my wife. We have 2 kids together, and life couldn't be any better. As for my ex, her outlook on life isn't too great. I can tell because of her pessimistic posts on Facebook and the occasional bitter message she sends me. I just show them to my wife and we have a good laugh about it. She may have some money still, but what she doesn't have is anyone around her that loves or cares for her as I did. Wow, this is one crazy story. It sounds to me like your ex started to believe she had it all and wanted more. She probably started to think she deserved more attention and that there was no better way or time to get it than with a client. Obviously, this proved to be a very stupid and selfish decision that would cost her the dearest relationships in her life and her career. You noticed right away when her behavior changed. And you asked your father-in-law for advice. I think you made lots of wise decisions through this nerve-wracking experience. She was left with nothing and no one to care for her. Let this be a lesson to keep your ego under control and never assume for 1 second that sneaking around to achieve something is a good idea. I'm so glad to hear that you have a new family and a close relationship with your adoptive father. Thank you for sharing your experience and positive outcome. I wish you the best of luck in life, OP. Now let's get into today's second story. My wife, 35, and I, 38, have 2 sons. At the time this story begins, Eddie is already 11 years old, and his younger brother Teddy is 7. One seemingly ordinary morning, my wife rushed off to work early. I prepared breakfast for my boys, and we had a fun, light-hearted morning chat, like we always do before school. The car ride to school was a little quiet, and it seemed like Eddie had something on his mind. I tried asking him if anything was wrong, but he said, no. I dropped them off as usual and went to work. After work, I picked them up from school. At the request of my wife, she texted me, saying she had to stay work late for a meeting. I hated when this happened, but was used to it by now. She stayed late at meetings at least 4 times each month for the past 10 years. When we got home, I started cooking dinner for my sons while they sat at the table and did homework. Eddie still seemed like he had something on his mind, but he did his homework and asked me questions about it. We ate dinner together, and they told me about their day at school. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but this was the last time I would have a conversation and dinner with my sons before discovering life-changing news. We were about to clear the table when Eddie said he had something to tell me. His voice cracked, and he sounded like he was about to cry. Teddy looked uncomfortable and asked Eddie if he was sure he should tell me about it. I assured them they could tell me anything. Eddie proceeded to tell me that Mommy told them I wasn't their real dad. That a few times every month, Mom would take them to visit their real dad. My jaw dropped. I asked him who their real dad was, and if I knew him. He said, yes, I knew him. It was Uncle Kevin. I could not move for a few seconds. Both the boys asked if I was okay if I was mad and what I was going to do. When I snapped out of it, I told them both that I loved them. I told them that, according to me, I would always be their dad. They were happy with that and helped me clean up dinner. They went off to play and I contemplated what I was going to do. My own brother fathered my children. How could this have happened? I couldn't believe it and I couldn't prove it. I told the boys to wait until a specific day to tell Mommy that they told me I wasn't their daddy. They agreed and seemed to forget about it. I laid on the couch watching the boys play until my wife got home. As soon as she did, I told her I wasn't feeling well and had to go to sleep. I laid in bed awake until my wife put the boys to bed. When she got in bed with me, she tried to see if I was sleeping, and I pretended to be. When she was asleep, I unlocked her phone. My heart was racing because I never checked her phone before, and I kept thinking she was going to wake up. I found a messaging app tucked into the last page of an app folder called Utilities. It was like she didn't want anyone to find it on her phone. One of her messaging conversations was with Kevin. It was like reading an everyday conversation between a romantic couple, talking about their day when they were going to meet next, how the boys were, and stuff like that. Mixed into that were messages like, I love you, I consider you to be my husband, the children are lucky to know their real father, I will marry you when the time is right, and then there were sexual messages. Apparently, whenever my wife and brother wanted to have sex, my wife would simply tell me that she had to work late. That was all the proof I needed. Right here under my nose on her phone. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world for believing my wife and family were perfect and honorable. I took screenshots of their conversations and sent it to myself. Revenge had no choice but to be sweet. The next day, I hired a PI and a lawyer. I already had some proof, but it had to be undeniable. The lawyer informed me that I could receive alimony from my ex, keep my house, and sue my brother for sleeping with my wife and ruining our marriage. A DNA test was done quickly, I might add, on the boys, and it was determined that the DNA was slightly off for mine. A more exact match was likely to be found in my brother's DNA. Over the next month, a PI followed my wife. It was hard for me to behave normally during this time, but helped to pretend that my son never told me the secret. At the end of the month, the PI sent me all he captured. There were 42 pictures of my wife, children, and brother. They were all behaving like a family at the park at his house and out to dinner. It was the weirdest, most heartbreaking thing to see. There were also pictures of my wife and brother through his bedroom window. The PI must have climbed a tree, and that's what I call dedication. The pictures were explicit. Now that I had all the proof I needed, it was time for my son to tell his mom that I knew the truth. I reminded him to tell her and Uncle Kevin next time they had a visit. 4 days later, my wife left with the kids under the pretext that they were going to visit my wife's mom. I've always hated her, but only because she always hated me. She probably wouldn't ever accept that her daughter conceived children with her husband's brother and passed them off as his own. They were gone for 30 minutes before they returned home. It was just enough time for them to arrive at Kevin's, only for Eddie to tell them that I knew the truth and race back home. It was too late though. I already changed the locks and put a note on the front door. It read, "It's time for the three of you to move in with Kevin. Divorce papers and court summons will be arriving there for Mommy and Daddy." My wife banged on the door and cried. It bothered me that it upset her so much. She chose my brother over me by sleeping with him, having his children, and maintaining a secret relationship with him for a very long time. Not only that, but she coached the boys not to tell me anything about it. Even though she sat by the front door crying for an absurdly long time, I had no desire to go out there and discuss anything with her. Eventually, Kevin arrived to pick them all up. They lived with him through the divorce proceedings and court hearings. I kept my house and won alimony payments for my wife. I didn't have to pay child support, and I won in court against my brother. He was ordered to pay me a very large sum of money for sleeping with my wife and ruining our marriage. After I became a wealthy bachelor, my ex's relationship with Kevin fell apart. It must have been different living together with the boys 24/7. The stress of going to court and losing a lot of money probably didn't help anything either. After just 1 year, my ex moved out of Kevin's house and in her mom's house. Throughout that year and even afterward, my ex would text me at least once a day asking how I was or telling me she was sorry. I still got to visit with the boys, and I know they appreciated it, but it was nothing compared to how we used to be together. My ex could see the difference, and she blamed herself for it, rightly so. It's been 2 years since all of this happened, and the boys show resentment towards their mother for changing who their dad is. She can hardly stand the guilt, but what choice does she have? She continues raising them at her mom's house and has yet to return to the dating scene. My brother doesn't speak to me, but I know he regrets what he's done because my dad told me so. I just started dating another woman, and I have a good feeling about her. She has 1 daughter and wants to have more children. She's compassionate, kind, and honest. I know that even if she doesn't become my wife, there's always hope for a bright future. Wow, Opie. I'm so sorry your wife did this to you. She knowingly went behind your back early on in marriage and had your brother's children. This isn't a story you hear every day, but unfortunately, it does happen. I'm glad to hear you have your dad to talk to, but for the most part, it seems you made smart decisions on your own. You took the time to figure out how to proceed. The things you set into motion helped you to the cleanest break. It's lucky your wife didn't try to frame you for anything or plot to kill you. This actually happens in the world today. I'm so sorry about what happened to you and hope you were able to heal from this situation.